Has there ever been a persistent feeling that something vital is missing from everything you were taught about Jesus? A disquieting sensation that behind the official gospel pages, a deeper, more unsettling truth lies hidden. A truth someone decided you should never know. If so, that very intuition you've carried for years has an explanation, one buried in the darkest archives of Christian history. In 1958, a Columbia University researcher named Morton Smith made a discovery at the remote Mar Saba monastery near Jerusalem that sent shockwaves through the global academic and ecclesiastical communities. What he unearthed was not just another ancient manuscript. It was a letter from Clement of Alexandria, one of the most respected 3rd-century church fathers, addressed to a man named Theodore. In this letter, Clement made a devastating confession that would forever alter our understanding of early Christianity. He openly admitted, in no uncertain terms, the existence of a secret Gospel of Mark. This was a sacred text containing teachings from Jesus so profound, so transformative, and so dangerous to the established order that they were deliberately removed from the Gospel we now read. They were reserved only for those deemed worthy of the kingdom's most sacred mysteries. In Clement's own words, this secret gospel contained accounts of initiatory rituals led by Jesus himself, mystical ceremonies unveiling entirely unknown dimensions of his ministry. It held esoteric teachings that transformed the very understanding of salvation and spiritual awakening. But here is the most unsettling part of all. The early church not only knew this sacred text existed, it used it. It guarded it jealously. And then, at some point in the first centuries, a conscious decision was made to suppress it, to erase it completely from the official story. But what was in this gospel that was so threatening to the religious power structures that they preferred to wipe it from collective memory rather than allow the masses access to its wisdom? And what does this imply for you, who may have spent years seeking a deeper divine connection, feeling that there must be more than the superficial answers provided? The answer to these questions not only challenges everything you thought you knew about Jesus and his original message, it reveals why, after 2,000 years, millions of sincere individuals continue to feel an inexplicable spiritual void. It's a soul hunger that official doctrines never seem to satisfy. This is because what was removed wasn't just words on parchment, it was the very mystical heart of Christ's teachings. It was the practical methods he used to awaken the latent divinity in his closest disciples, the secrets of spiritual transformation that turned ordinary fishermen into illuminated beings capable of changing the world. And all of this remained hidden in a manuscript that academia and the church have tried to discredit, ignore, or minimize for over 60 years. The time has come to understand the complete truth about the secret Gospel of Mark. It is time to grasp exactly what rituals it described, what teachings it held, and why its suppression has kept humanity from its true spiritual potential. Prepare for a journey that won't just transform your understanding of Christianity, it may awaken in you the same divine flame that Jesus ignited in those privileged disciples deemed worthy of the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. The discovery at Mar Saba. That summer morning in 1958 would irrevocably change our view of early Christianity. Dr. Morton Smith, an ancient history professor from Columbia University, was conducting research in the library of the Mar Saba monastery, a 5th-century spiritual fortress built into the cliffs of the Judean desert. While cataloging ancient manuscripts, Smith discovered something extraordinary written in the final pages of a 17th-century edition of the letters of Ignatius of Antioch. In 17th-century Greek handwriting, someone had copied a letter that would alter the history of biblical studies. It was a letter from Clement of Alexandria addressed to a Christian named Theodore, dated approximately 200 AD. And in this letter, Clement made revelations the church had kept secret for 18 centuries. By Clement's own account, Mark had authored 2 Gospels. The first was the one we all know, the public version designed for the general instruction of believers. But a second, far more profound and esoteric gospel existed, which Mark had compiled for those Christians who had advanced beyond basic faith and were ready for the most sacred mysteries. Clement wrote, "To those who are being perfected, being initiated into the great mysteries, the secret gospel of Mark was transmitted." But what exactly did this forbidden gospel contain? Clement provided specific fragments that had been deliberately omitted from the Gospel of Mark we know. And these fragments revealed a completely unknown dimension of Jesus' ministry. According to the secret text, after the raising of Lazarus, an event Clement confirms as historical, something extraordinary happened that never appeared in the official Gospels. The secret Gospel described how Lazarus, deeply transformed by his experience of death and resurrection, approached Jesus with a specific request. He wanted to be initiated into the deepest mysteries of the kingdom. And Jesus agreed. According to the text, at nightfall, the young man came to him wearing a linen cloth over his naked body, and he remained with him that night, for Jesus was teaching him the mystery of the kingdom of God. This description wasn't mere historical narrative. To anyone familiar with the mystical traditions of antiquity, these words clearly depicted an initiatory ritual, a sacred ceremony of spiritual transformation that Jesus personally conducted with those disciples who had reached a sufficient level of inner purification. The white linen tunic was the traditional attire of initiates in sacred mysteries across many ancient spiritual traditions. The night of teaching represented the direct transmission of esoteric knowledge that could not be communicated through public parables. But Clement's revelations went further. The letter mentioned that some deviant Christian groups, specifically the Carpocratians, had corrupted this secret gospel, using it to justify libertine practices that completely distorted its original purpose. And herein lies a primary reason for its suppression. The early church, in its struggle against heresies, decided it was safer to eliminate the secret gospel entirely than to risk it being misunderstood or misused. We are living in an age where information is more accessible than ever, yet many still feel adrift, caught in incomplete truths that were carefully curated centuries ago. Consider this. What if the very elements that were excised from the scriptures contain the answers many have been seeking for years? Answers that could illuminate a personal path, strengthen a connection to the divine, and reveal the true purpose of Jesus' coming. The suppression of this text wasn't just an act of censorship, it was an act that may have fundamentally altered the spiritual trajectory of Western civilization. It suggests that a core component of the original message, the how-to of spiritual transformation, was walled off, leaving subsequent generations with the why, but not the way. This raises a profound question. How different would our world be if this practical, initiatory path had remained the central focus of the faith? The academic firestorm. When Morton Smith finally published his discovery in 1973, the reaction was immediate and polarized. Some academics hailed it as the most important New Testament studies finding of the 20th century. Others, especially those with ecclesiastical ties, scrambled to discredit it, questioning its authenticity and suggesting it might be a sophisticated modern forgery. But the technical, paleographic, and stylistic evidence strongly supported the manuscript's authenticity. The letter demonstrated a knowledge of early Christian literature that would be nearly impossible for a modern forger to replicate. More importantly, the letter's content explained mysteries and narrative inconsistencies in the canonical Gospels that scholars had noted for centuries but had never been able to resolve. Why did the Gospel of Mark seem to have inexplicable narrative leaps? Why did certain stories appear incomplete? Why were references to mysteries and secrets constant, yet never explained? The secret Gospel of Mark provided the answers. The implications of this discovery go far beyond academic curiosity. If it is true that Jesus conducted initiatory rituals to transmit esoteric teachings to select disciples, what does this mean for our entire understanding of Christianity? What specific teachings were transmitted in these nocturnal ceremonies, and why did the later church make the decision to completely eliminate them from the Christian tradition? The answers to these questions not only reveal hidden dimensions of Christ's persona, they show us exactly what was removed from our shared spiritual heritage and perhaps how we can begin to recover it. Clement's letter was not a casual correspondence. It was a specific pastoral instruction to Theodore, a community leader facing a serious problem. The Carpocratians, a sect considered heretical, were using fragments of the secret gospel to justify aberrant practices. In his response, Clement provided details, confirming that Mark, after Peter's death, compiled a more spiritual gospel in Alexandria, adding certain words and actions that would reveal the true knowledge to those who are being initiated. The Greek term Clement uses, maioumenua, is not accidental. It specifically refers to people undergoing mystery rituals, the sacred ceremonies of spiritual transformation common in the Hellenistic world. This means Clement was confirming something revolutionary. Early Christianity wasn't just a religion of public preaching. It included an esoteric level with advanced teachings transmitted through ritual initiations. Clement provided another fragment that was equally revealing. It described how Jesus encountered the sister of the young man, and Salome. According to the secret text, Jesus did not receive her at that specific time. Think about the implications of this. It suggests that even among Jesus's closest followers, there were specific moments and circumstances for different types of teaching. Not everyone was present for every lesson. Not everyone received the same level of instruction. This flatly contradicts the popular image of Christianity as a completely egalitarian religion where all teachings were public. According to Clement, early Christianity operated much like the mystery schools of the ancient world, with progressive levels of initiation, gradual teachings adapted to each disciple's spiritual development, and esoteric knowledge reserved for those who had proven themselves ready. The question that naturally arises is, what specific teachings were transmitted? What mysteries of the kingdom were considered too sacred for public preaching? And more importantly, why did the later church decide it was better to completely eliminate this esoteric dimension, rather than preserve it? The answers show why so many sincere individuals experience that persistent feeling that something more must exist in Christ's teachings, something deeper, more transformative, because what Clement described were the practical methods to awaken latent divinity, the heart of the mystery. What Clement revealed was the direct transmission of spiritual knowledge through specific initiatory rituals. These rituals followed a recognizable pattern. First, preparation, Lazarus passing through death and resurrection. Second, the initiation, at night. Third, the initiate wore the linen tunic, symbolizing the stripping away of the old identity. But what happened? Clement used a specific phrase. Jesus was teaching him the mystery of the kingdom of God. In the original Greek, mysterion referred specifically to sacred truths that could only be communicated through direct experience, not through words or concepts. This suggests Jesus was transmitting direct mystical experiences, practical methods to alter consciousness. In the Greek mystery traditions, like the Eleusinian mysteries, initiates described experiences of death and rebirth. Was it possible Jesus was directing similar rituals? The textual evidence suggests yes. The secret gospel mentioned that after the ritual with Lazarus, rising from there, he returned to the other side of the Jordan. This phrase also appears in the canonical Gospel of Mark, but in a completely different context, suggesting a later editor connected narratives that were originally separated by events that were deliberately omitted. It forces us to ask, what else was left out? What other crucial events were deemed too dangerous for the public record? Even more revealing is the second fragment. Jesus did not receive them. To modern readers, this might sound like rejection, but in the context of mystical initiations, it meant it was not the appropriate time for their particular level. This didn't imply women were excluded. The presence of Mary Magdalene suggests the opposite. It implied the initiatory rituals were specifically personalized for each individual based on their spiritual development. This personalization is consistent with the canonical Gospels. He used parables for crowds and reserved the deepest transmissions for private moments. But the secret gospel revealed this personalization, included specific rituals and practical methods. And all this was deliberately removed. To fully grasp the revolutionary nature of the secret gospel of Mark, we must place it in the religious context. The first century was a period of extraordinary mystical effervescence. The mysteries of Eleusis, Dionysus, Mithras, Isis. What did all these traditions have in common? First, they recognized that genuine spiritual transformation requires more than faith. It requires direct experiences. Second, they understood This led to gradual systems of initiation. Third, they used specific symbols and rituals. Fourth, they kept these deeper teachings discreet, not from elitism, but from a practical understanding that spiritual knowledge, misapplied, can be harmful. When we examine the fragments, we find exactly these same elements. The linen tunic, identical to Isis and Eleusis. The private nocturnal ceremonies, standard. The direct transmission, by Jesus, corresponded exactly to the role of the Hierophant. Even the language, mysterion, was the technical term. Does this mean Jesus was simply adapting traditions? It suggests he was operating from a universal understanding of how human spiritual transformation works. The fundamental difference was that while pagan mysteries promised spiritual experiences, Jesus offered a permanent transformation of identity. That's why the first Christians described their experience as being born again. They weren't using metaphors, they were describing real changes in consciousness. But here lies one of the greatest tragedies. When the church institutionalized, leaders began to see these mystical practices as competition for their authority. They emphasized controllable doctrines. The result was that Christianity lost precisely what had made it so transformative. The evidence is everywhere. Authentic Christian mystics, from John of the Cross to Teresa of Avila, constantly described mystical experiences, but they had to develop these methods independently because the specific techniques Jesus used had been deliberately suppressed. Imagine for a moment how different history would have been if the practical methods of spiritual transformation used by Jesus had been systematically preserved. Instead of a religion based on belief, Christianity would have remained a path of direct inner transformation. And what does this mean for you today? It means that sensation, that something more must exist, isn't a fantasy. It is the ancestral memory of what Christianity was originally designed to be. To understand the suppression, we must look closer at the group that provided the official excuse for it, the Carpocratians. They are the group Clement mentioned as being responsible for corrupting these sacred texts. The Carpocratians were followers of Carpocrates, a 2nd century Gnostic teacher. He taught that Jesus had been a man who had attained spiritual perfection and that anyone could reach the same level. The problem was the Carpocratian interpretation. They believed that to transcend the material world, one had to experience everything, including conventionally sinful acts. They used fragments of the secret gospel to justify ceremonies that included ritualized sexual practices. Clement was horrified. In his letter, he emphasized that the Carpocratians had falsified the secret gospel, but the damage was done. Orthodox Christian leaders began to associate any esoteric teaching or initiatory ritual with the Carpocratians. Instead of distinguishing between uses, they suppressed the gospel itself. This reaction was not entirely irrational. The 2nd and 3rd centuries were periods of intense competition. In this context, preserving texts that could be misused was a risk many leaders were unwilling to take. But the consequences of this safe decision were devastating. By suppressing the secret gospel, the Church eliminated an entire model of Christianity that recognized different levels of spiritual teaching and the need for practical methods to facilitate direct transformative experiences. The result was the creation of a flattened Christianity, a religion where all spiritual truths were accessible to all people without need for gradual development. This model ignores the practical realities of human spiritual development. By pretending these differences didn't exist, the Church condemned millions of sincere seekers to frustration. Ironically, the suppression didn't eliminate the problem. Throughout history, marginal groups continued to develop esoteric practices. What would have happened if the Church had preserved its authentic teachings while protecting against misinterpretations? These are not merely historical questions. They are invitations to recognize that the methods can function just as well in the 21st century. The corroborating evidence. While academic debates continued, discoveries were providing physical evidence. In 1945, Peasant found the Nag Hammadi Library, 52 Coptic texts. The Gospel of Thomas. 114 Secret Sayings of Jesus. The Gospel of Philip, Mystical Sacramental Rituals. The Gospel of Mary, Magdalene. Revealed esoteric teachings that Peter rejected because he had not received them. But the evidence went beyond texts. In the oldest Christian catacombs in Rome, archaeologists identified symbols. Catacomb of Priscilla, white-robed figures, nocturnal ceremonies. In Syria, excavations revealed baptistries for all-night ritual immersions. The Dead Sea Scrolls provided another crucial set of evidence. The Qumran texts revealed that the Essene community practiced exactly the kind of graduated Christianity. The Essenes had multiple levels of initiation. They used immersion rituals, special vestments, and mentioned hidden teachings transmitted orally. In Egypt, excavations revealed contemplative practices. In Turkey, the cave churches of Cappadocia showed initiatory ceremonies. But perhaps the most striking evidence came from Capernaum, Peter's house, converted into a cult center, suggesting private ceremonies. In Bethany, excavations revealed structures near Lazarus's tomb, designed for initiation. And in Jerusalem, multiple mikvehs, ritual baths, for purifications, exactly the preparation the secret gospel described. All this physical evidence pointed toward the same inevitable conclusion: early Christianity was a complex system with gradual teaching and transformation. And all this had been removed, not because it was inauthentic, but because it was inconvenient for the structures the church was developing. The very stones were testifying that Clement had been describing historical realities. The pattern of suppression. In 1981, the Vatican issued an internal declaration. It concerned the secret gospel and established an official position. Instead of declaring it a forgery, the declaration referred to the text as spiritually dangerous for the faith of simple believers and recommended its study be limited. Why this specific distinction? The language suggested the problem was not its authenticity, but its content. This becomes even more significant when we examine the Vatican Apostolic Archive. 85 linear kilometers. What do these sections contain? According to OI scholars, they include correspondence discussing text to include, in the canon, copies of apocryphal and Gnostic Gospels, documents from ecumenical councils, testimonies from inquisitorial interrogations of Christian mystics. But the Vatican's policies were not limited to ancient documents. In 1962, proposals to reevaluate apocryphal texts were withdrawn. In 1978, when new Coptic manuscripts were discovered, the Vatican ensured access could be controlled. The pattern is not an institution protecting doctrine. It is an institution that understands these discoveries can transform Christianity and is taking measures to control these truths. But why would this control be necessary? The most probable answer is that the Vatican understands that early Christianity included esoteric dimensions that were deliberately removed. The problem is not that these texts contradict Jesus. The problem is they reveal teachings that contemporary structures are not prepared to explain. A Christianity that includes direct mystical experiences does not require institutional mediation. And here lies the true threat. It reveals that the authentic Christian experience can be far more direct, personal, and transformative than institutionalized forms have allowed. Of all the implications, none is more revealing than its description of the resurrection. It was not a singular, unrepeatable miracle. It was the ultimate demonstration of a process he had been teaching. The secret text described how Jesus spent months working with disciples, transmitting methods for them to experience their own spiritual death and resurrection. These were techniques to alter consciousness. The physical death on the cross was an external symbol of an internal process. This death of the ego could be facilitated through purification, meditation, and ritual. What specific methods? Fasting, specific breathing techniques, immersion rituals. But most significant was the final initiation, where the disciple experienced symbolic death. In this state, the disciple experienced the light of the kingdom, an experience of union. When the disciple resurrected, they no longer identified as a limited human, but as an expression of the same divine consciousness. This produced observable changes, spontaneous healings, extrasensory perception. This explains multiple mysteries in the canonical Gospels. But Jesus spoke of followers doing greater works. Why? The kingdom is within you. Why? Eternal life is experienced immediately. But born again? They were guided through these processes. The change in the disciples was not just from witnessing, but experiencing their own spiritual resurrection. But when Christianity institutionalized, this was replaced. It became something that happened only to Jesus. The result, a Christianity where believers resurrection instead of working to experience it in this life. The recovered heritage. One of the most revolutionary aspects is what it reveals about the role of women, a role suppressed by the patriarchal church. The Salome fragment was not exclusion, but precise initiatory principles. In fact, evidence suggests women held leadership roles. The Nag Hammadi texts, Gospel of Mary, Peter reacted with jealousy, Gospel of Philip, Mary Magdalene as the companion, Pistis Sophia. But why was this suppressed? Esoteric Christianity recognized spiritual polarity, masculine and feminine. Jesus apparently structured his teaching so certain aspects were transmitted via female disciples. This explains why Mary Magdalene received teachings unknown to Peter. It was recognition. She had specific spiritual capabilities. Archaeological evidence supports this. Catacomb frescoes show women directing ceremonies. These disappear after the 3rd century. Paul's letters, women in leadership. Priscilla, Phoebe, Eunia. Records from councils reveal debates about excluding women, which proves they had been participating. Perhaps the most significant evidence comes from how esoteric aspects survived into traditions with female leadership. The medieval mystical movements. Hildegard, Macfeld, Marguerite Porete developed techniques that resonated with Gnostic texts. Many faced persecution for claiming direct revelations. Eastern Orthodoxy, female monastic traditions, preserved contemplative practices. The Desert Mothers developed methods that resonated with the secret gospel. What does this mean? Marginalization was not from Jesus, but institutional decisions. The suppression thrived women and survived the entire tradition of essential methods. This explains why many women feel official. Christianity doesn't their potential. The secret gospel is providing historical evidence that their exclusion was a distortion, not an original teaching. Now, the heart of the mystery. The secret gospel implies 3 levels. 1. Public parables. 2. Disciple explanations. 3. Initiatory secret gospel. How to? The process, purification, symbolic death, ego, experience of divine light, rebirth. Do you understand now why this was suppressed? Christianity capable of producing people with direct experience does not require mediators. Individuals cannot be controlled, become centers of transmission. From the perspective of leaders concerned with control, this is an existential threat. The decision was strategic to transform Christianity from a path of realization into a system of belief dependent on mediation. And so we arrive at the end of this journey, but is it truly the end? Or is it the beginning of your true spiritual heritage? What has been revealed are documentary evidence that Christianity was originally designed to produce the transformation your soul has been craving. That feeling that something more must exist was the ancestral memory of what Christianity had been. And now, the most important question, what will you do with this knowledge? The initiatory teachings were universal methods. The principles, purification, ego death, divine light, are timeless. If your heart is resonating, you are awakening. It is no coincidence that you discovered these revelations. Now, perhaps you'll reclaim the transformative dimensions to replace faith, but to complete it. The kingdom of heaven is within you. It always was. And now perhaps you understand why.